I know I already made a video about certain things to look for or do when submitting to the journal, but as it happens, there are more reasons and more things that I'm concerned about as I read through emails and submissions, and over time different issues come up. So I figured I'd make a secondary video, follow-up video, that goes through some of these concerns in order, again, to help you have the best chance of getting your work accepted when you submit to the Jewish Literary Journal. So we'll start with a few things, and we'll see how long the list gets. Again, I hope this doesn't come off as complaining. It's more just a preference list of things that I would rather not see to, again, put me and other readers in the best mood, and this could probably apply across all journal submissions, especially those that ask for submission through email rather than a system. Again, the system typically takes care of a lot of these things, but even in the system, like Submittable or other options of that nature, they usually have a open square or submission form to write to the editors. And oftentimes I think about, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? How much should the work speak for itself versus how much should you speak in regards to your own work, an introduction, an explanation, maybe even a coda about it, sort of concluding why you submitted, what the purpose of it was. And I tend to always sort of use my poet's hat and think less is more, that you kind of just want to give basic information and let the work speak for itself. And then so that brings us into the first sort of pet peeve, which is oftentimes people write a lot of things or no things at all, and sort of the question is, what should I write in the body of the email? And so I think that really I'd prefer almost no writing to a lot of writing, because I do think that the work should speak for itself, and oftentimes people are writing lots of information, and in some ways the more you write, the more sort of details you let slip that I don't necessarily need to know. If it's been submitted multiple times to multiple journals, if this is not the final piece, if this piece needs complicated backstory or information in order to understand it, if you're just writing to random people and not even necessarily me, or even the wrong people, right? It's important to know who's running the journal, who's reading the journal, who's the editors. I often get emails addressed to people who may have formerly worked for the JLJ but don't currently work, right? It shows that you're not really keeping up to date. And so in a lot of ways, it's better for yourself if you sort of just write who you are, what you're submitting, the genre, right? Especially in the subject line, right? The genre and the title of the piece, maybe even your name. It sort of streamlines the whole process. And so, again, err on the side of small submissions, or at least coherent and clear and as few words as necessary. We'll take the poet's way again. Additionally, another thing that comes up a lot is people will sort of pitch their writing to me. And it's interesting because on the one hand, you do want to create excitement and buzz around your own pieces, and I understand that, and that's important. On the other hand, it's literary works. It's not like a sale on clothes that's going to go away in a month. So you want to be careful with your hyperbole and your sort of wording around your piece. I just received an email recently about, this is a limited time sort of offer with the piece, and that's really not how literary journals work. We actually do have probably the fastest turnaround I can think of anybody in maybe the world, to be honest, which is a bold statement, so I'm happy to be corrected on that. But we do, within a month, you will know whether or not we are going to publish, and sometimes quicker depending on when in the month you submit. You will know very, very quickly. I mean, there are submissions where it takes a whole year to hear back, or months upon months to hear back, whereas within 4 weeks, you will hear back whether or not you're being published. So the idea of having a piece come in that's limited time, or even time sensitive, so you want to make sure that you submit in the right month, right? Not just submit things whenever, but if it's time sensitive or about a holiday or something of that nature, right, where things are within a specific time period of the year, right? We read so fast and reply so fast that you can time your piece to be in the right place at the right time, and be aware of the dates of things like that. But don't sort of pitch your piece to us as, well, look what I have, or it's limited in when you can read it, things of that nature, right? Because we work fast enough that it really shouldn't be how things are submitted, right? Desperation and that emotion do not help sell literature. They might help sell other more tangible items, clothes, electronics, food, that kind of stuff, right? Where things run out and expire. But good literature lasts a long time, and the journal is online, so it's going to last probably forever to a degree, right? Everything on the internet lasts forever, is a good way to think about it. So the idea of time sensitive or things of that nature it doesn't really apply to literary journals or literary items in general, literary works in general. So to sell that way is, I think, just kind of as crass or not understanding within which medium you're working, right? It feels sort of gimmicky. And also it puts pressure on the editors. And I know from personal experience, nobody makes a good decision under pressure, right? Nobody wants to feel pressured. Nobody wants to have to make split-second decisions, right? We want to look at the piece, really consider the piece, sit there and think about it, and digest it. And hopefully it's a piece that lends to that sort of thing, right? You wouldn't want somebody to make a snap judgment on your work that you've been working on for months at a time, right? Why would something that you've crafted over months and months of time, why would you want somebody else to then have only 30 seconds to read it, right? Or you don't want to force people into making split decisions over your complicated work. You want to give them the adequate time, or at least the time that they request, to consider it. A third issue that comes up a whole bunch is this idea of the piggyback email. Because we don't use those systems that create individual submissions, so submittable, other things like that, again, the big thing is creating an individual email for each individual submission. So knowing what the submission guidelines are and knowing how we like to receive our submissions is of the utmost importance. Again, it shows that you've interacted with the journal. It shows that you've put in the time to get to know us, to get to know what we like, to get to know what we're interested in. Think of it like dating, right? You don't just talk at somebody, you have a conversation with them. And a lot of the ways the journal is a conversation, right? We're interested in contemporary Jewish writing. And what does that say about writing? What does that say about Judaism? What does that say about how they interact? And so part of that relationship between us and you, the submitter, is that you get to know our preferences. And so oftentimes people will piggyback off of emails, or they'll submit something and then 6 months later they'll submit with the same on the same thread. And there's a lot of reasons not to do that. One is it just seems lazy, right? If you can't take the time to get to know us, to submit an individual email with your work, it just feels like we're an afterthought. And again, you're trying to, for lack of a better term, impress who you're submitting to, right? You always want to keep yourself in sort of, not submissive, but at least knowing that the publisher is the gatekeeper, for lack of a better term, or for lack of a better sort of classification, let's say, that you have to know the relationship between where you are and where the journal is. And so, right, a submitter is less sort of less higher, or I guess lower is the right word, right? Lower on the hierarchy than the publisher. So you want to kind of know that when you're submitting, you're asking for something out of them. And yes, it's a reciprocal relationship, right? There is no journal without submitters, but assume that there are other people vying for the same spot that you are, and therefore you want to make the best impression, right? It's like a job interview. Yes, the person hiring you needs you to work at whatever they're hiring you for, but at the end of the day, the person who's paying the check has a leg up on that position. So you want to make sure when you're submitting the email that, again, you're following the guidelines, you're doing the individual work, individual emails, so that those who are reading it can find it easy, right? That's another thing. It's not just comes off lazy, it also complicates organization and ease of reading and ease of finding the document later, right? If there's 10 emails in a line and an editor opens up the email and can't tell which of the 3 submissions they're supposed to be looking at, it can complicate your submission, and it can also just lead to a sort of sour taste or rejection because it's just too complicated to find. And again, as hundreds of people submit, time becomes more precious, and editors get a little shorter with their patience, especially if they're, let's say, it's the 18th of the month and they've already read 30 submissions, and now you're the 31st, and your email is complicated. Again, it leads to poorer results. And really the last pet peeve I'm going to talk about today is to really make sure you understand genre and to really understand what the journal is looking for. So I think I mentioned this last time, but I'm going to re-emphasize it because it happens consistently, which is people submit pieces which they hope to get into the journal, but that if they read the journal, if they paid attention to what was said in the submission guidelines, and what's emailed around, in what has been published previously, they would know that their piece doesn't fit in. So a prime example is a Dvar Torah. Again, Dvar Torah does not belong in the Jewish Literary Journal. It's not literary. It's Torah, which is a whole different category of writing and understanding. That's rabbinical writing, not literary writing. And again, I would love to see perhaps a genre bending or sort of subject bending piece, but if you in your heart know that it's just a Dvar Torah, that you have worded well, then that's not creative nonfiction. That's a Dvar Torah. Similarly, things like books, full-length novels, full-length history pieces, the journal does not publish. We've never done book reviews. We don't plan on doing book reviews. We publish original work. So we get emails consistently from people like, oh, do you want to consider this piece that's 7,000 words long, or this piece that's 40,000 words long, or this piece that's a whole book? And you can email, and I'll probably be polite and respond. But again, if you're trying to get on the good side of the editors or the people reading, you want to know what they're looking for. And finally, we get the question often about translation. And translation is actually an interesting gray area because it can be original work, obviously, and we can get into a whole separate discussion about translating other people's work and how that works and how to do that best, but that's a whole different video. The reason we don't publish translations is because nobody can check if the translation is correct, right? That's a whole another job on top of reading the work itself. So a translation is not the same as the original. So you're already reading the translation as its own poem to a degree. Obviously, there's a basis for it, but if you talk to any translator on a regular basis, they have an interpretation window, a mode of interpretation of translated work that they have to use in order to translate something fully, right? Because not every language translates perfectly through to English or any other language for that matter, right? Language is complicated and language dependent. Many times translators take small liberties in order to help make the poem coherent in the language to which they are translating. And while that is admirable and an excellent use of time, it is not what the Jewish Literary Journal can take upon itself to edit or translate or sort of check against the original, right? It becomes a whole nother job to read the original, understand the original, check your understanding of the original against the translator, and see if it's any good. And so that's the reason really why the Jewish Literary Journal doesn't do translations. Perhaps it's in the future it'll become, certain languages can be translated, and we'll take a look. But that's not really on the docket currently. So for now, we go with the no translation rule because it's just really its own genre of poetry, its own genre of writing that needs its own time and effort that unfortunately we cannot give at the moment. And so with all that, I'm going to end this video. It's becoming a rant, I suppose, but hopefully all of these points and information and the information I shared will help lead you to have better results with us, and if not with us, with other people, and with your writing in general, if you start thinking about how translation works or how to format emails as its own genre of writing, right? We can always improve what we're doing. So hopefully I get to read some of your pieces soon, and thanks for listening and reading.